The Denver Broncos can learn a thing or two from the teams that were playing in the NFL Divisional Playoffs this weekend on offense and on defense. If they want to take that next step and find that secret sauce, how are they going to do that? We'll break that down and much more here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's happening, Broncos Country? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where you know it is your team every single day for all the Broncos news, content, coverage, analysis, and more that you get every single day all year long, even throughout the entire offseason. Locked On Broncos is the place to be. So thank you to all the everydayers and first listeners out there in Broncos Country. Make sure you subscribe however you choose to listen to the show. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports, joined as always by Sayre Bedinger, site expert, predominantly orange.com. And look, Broncos Country, we got a lot to break down here on today's episode of the show. A lot to break it down this week as we get ready to talk about our position previews. But we'll wrap up today's show by highlighting special teams coordinator Ben Kotwica. Sean Payton making the decision late last week to fire him and to move in a different direction. What caused that to happen? We'll also take a look at what the Broncos defense can learn from the teams that played in the NFL Divisional Playoffs this weekend and advanced and survived. We'll take a look and kick things off with what the Broncos offense in particular can learn from the teams that played in the NFL Divisional Playoffs this weekend. Here on today's episode show, brought to you by our friends over there at Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code, all lowercase, LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Sayre, tell you what, a wild slate of games over the weekend here. Saturday and Sunday, we got to watch some NFL playoff football. Unfortunately, we didn't get to watch the Denver Broncos there, but I tell you what, there were a lot of lessons to kind of take in from some of the games that we saw and some of the teams that we saw playing. Let's start on the offensive side of the ball here. What is it do we feel like Denver can learn from the teams that were playing this weekend on offense in the playoffs?
Well, I think, Cody, you and I talked about this before the show, but the Broncos do have one of the best assets already locked in for the future, which is you got your quarterback. You got to have a quarterback that can be a difference maker in games like this. And shoot, I mean, it's survival of the fittest out there in the NFL. There's so many good quarterbacks in the postseason this year. And, you know, the Final Four, I think, Cody, indicated that beyond the quarterback, you absolutely non-negotiable have to have a stellar running game in order to make it past the divisional round. And even some of the best running teams in the league, like the Ravens and the Lions, even that wasn't good enough. So you've got to be able to run the football. And I know that Sean Payton made some comments at his end of season presser about there's not many bell cow backs in the NFL anymore. Look, I know what he's saying there, but when is the last time that Sean Payton had a great offense that didn't feature a certain running back? I don't think you need to necessarily have a bell cow back, but you do need to have somebody that you can feature at that position. And I think the NFL playoffs and the divisional round specifically really emphasize that.
And I feel like for Sean, too, it's got to be two backs, right? Like there were years where it was Kamara and Mark Ingram, and then there were years it was Kamara and Latavius Murray. Like you had two guys, and they complemented each other relatively well. I agree with you in terms of the run game. My biggest thing is you need to have an absolute dog at the running back position. I mean, look, you aren't going to find many Saquon Barkleys available out there. And every time I see Saquon break off a big run for the Eagles this season, and obviously going over 200 yards in the playoffs over the weekend, I thought to myself, I was like, man, the Giants got to be kicking themselves. Though I will say this, I don't think Saquon would have had that level of success if he stayed in New York. So going to obviously a great place, I think an environment like Philadelphia was great for him. Can the Broncos build that type of environment for a player, whether you sign a guy in free agency, whether you draft a guy in the NFL draft, that you feel like, hey, now that you're here, you can plug in and now you can just go because we have a good environment for you. We got a good offensive line for you to be able to open up holes. So much of it has been, I think, consistencies in that department of running backs for Denver this year, not seeing the hole correctly. And then sometimes it taking too long to develop a run play. And obviously you're only going to get a few yards, but then that's where I looked at it. And it was the difference, right? You look at Saquon Barkley, what he was able to do. You mentioned the success of the running offense, like Jahmyr Gibbs, man, I was just watching him for Detroit. It's like, man, every time this guy touches the ball, something special happens. Unfortunately, the Lions, they didn't win that game. They were still able to put up 31 something points, and obviously the run game, Gibbs was a big part of their success in that regard. But you have to have an absolute dog. James Cook, another example, and we'll throw an honorable mention to even Ty Johnson for the Buffalo Bills. The Ravens-Bills game, to me, like it kind of epitomized like why you have to have a dog at the running back position, because think of it. If you're the Ravens, you're Lamar, like, why are you throwing it on a 2-point conversion versus handing it to Derrick Henry from 2 yards out, right? They didn't do that, right? That was mind-boggling. But then you look at the Buffalo Bills on the flip side. Josh Allen used his legs and picked up first downs. But then it was James Cook. It was Ty Johnson. Josh Allen didn't have to use his arm too much in that playoff game here. And it's like the formula is here for the Broncos to say, you know what? If we add this or this, we can do it. Because if you look at the Buffalo Bills, Sayre, look at their receivers. They didn't have any guy necessarily stand out in any way, shape, or form. They had a bunch of guys that were contributing role players, but they didn't necessarily have a star. Denver needs a guy. They need a dog there. But, man, you have a run game. It balances things out if you also have a quarterback.
It does, especially a quarterback that can run, which you mentioned Josh Allen, but how about Jaden Daniels in Washington?
Yeah.
I know that maybe Bo Nix isn't the same exact type of athlete as those guys, but I do feel like it's abundantly clear based on what we saw this past season that he can be
Bo can do it.
as much of an asset in the running game. Absolutely. And you saw Washington doesn't have a Saquon Barkley, but I mean, Brian Robinson had a good game. Austin Eckler had a good game. And because of the threat of Jaden Daniels, both scrambling off of pass plays as well as designed quarterback runs, like Detroit just had no answer for that.
No.
And Denver did not utilize that much this year. And so I think there's something to be said, Cody, about your point of the Ravens not going for running the ball when they were going for 2 as well. Like, that's another thing that I think I learned offensively for Denver going forward is like, when you have something that's working, like clearly working, don't get cute and be stupid about it. Like, Mark Andrews should not be getting memed today. Like, they should have never thrown that pass. Now, should he have caught the ball? Yes, absolutely. Yeah, catch the ball. You're highly paid to catch the ball. But at the same time, you're ripping off big run after big run. Like, there were a couple of drives that Buffalo just could not stop Derrick Henry and Justice Hill, much less when you've got Lamar out there who's a threat to run as well. And so just getting cute at the worst possible times, like what is Todd Monken doing in that situation where you need 2 yards? You've got 2 guys in Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry who basically every time they carry the ball, it's going for 2 yards before they even get hit by somebody. So that's where I think if you're the Denver Broncos, and we saw this a number of times, when something is working, like, stop getting cute about it. We don't need to be messing around and being like, all right, well, these passing plays were working really well, so let's try the end around to Marvin Mims, or let's start getting horizontal when we're running the ball down their throat. I don't understand that. I understand there needs to be variety and there's going to the well too many times, but man, the playoffs prove that if you can find that bread and butter, man, stick to it offensively.
Yeah, 100%. Look, there's another thing that I think stood out clear as day, and I think this applies to most games, but specifically in the playoffs, when you're playing teams where your margin for error against some of the better teams is very, very thin. Denver ran up against that, against the Buffalo Bills in the wild card round, but you look at teams like the Los Angeles Rams, you look at the Detroit Lions, you look at the Baltimore Ravens, turnovers, Sayre. Turnovers were the one thing that really did those teams in. Like, Detroit had a pick six, Jared Goff threw. He threw another interception right before half. They had too many turnovers. They had a wide receiver throw an interception as well. And it's like, when you have those amount of turnovers, you're affording those teams extra opportunities, extra possessions. Somewhat, you're able to score on one, but like for the Commanders, they had great field positioning really after that wide receiver interception that Jameson Williams had thrown there. And it's just like they took advantage of those things, right? And they weren't one-dimensional, which the Broncos offense a lot of times this year was one-dimensional. People want to say, what was the Broncos offense? Bo Nix was the Broncos offense. Yes. And look, and I also see another thing too, like we can even talk, I feel like it's fair to address this. I see a lot of Broncos fans tearing down Jaden Daniels. Look, Jaden Daniels is a terrific young quarterback, having a tremendous rookie season. Bo Nix is a terrific young quarterback, had a tremendous rookie season. Don't get into the little social media wars of trying to tear one guy down to build the other one up. It's not a good look. Enjoy that the game right now, Sayre, the NFL, I feel like with some of these young quarterbacks, 10 years from now, maybe not even like less, maybe 5 or 6 years from now, we're going to be sitting here older, a little bit more gray hair on our beards. We're like, man, this is the league is in a good place with these guys as QB. So enjoy it. Don't tear these guys down. They're obviously tremendous players, tremendous teams, different circumstances, different personnel. Those things matter. But man, you cannot turn the ball over. LA could not they turned the ball over in the snow. And look, that's the difference. You used to playing in California inside a dome for the most part. I know Stafford has played in snow games before, and he was part of the NFC North, but turnovers, that doomed them. And simply, you can't do that. And I know you and I were talking off air before we even started the show. There was another element that I think is also important that the Broncos can learn in this game as it pertains to maybe the conditions.
Yeah, the elements, as it were, right? Every AFC playoff game is probably going to be played in bad weather. I mean, unless the LA Chargers or the Houston Texans or the Miami Dolphins are hosting playoff games, which, I mean, with Buffalo in the AFC East and Kansas City in the AFC West, and even Denver now, as they've set their sights to winning the AFC West, like, where are you going to be able to go on the road and basically play a good weather game in the AFC playoffs? Like, you're either going to Baltimore, you're going to Kansas City, Buffalo, we're talking about Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, like even Denver, right? I mean, this time of year, like, you're asking to play in the elements, basically, if you're in the AFC. And because of that, man, you have to be, like you said, taking good care of the football, able to run the football. Your quarterback has to be making good decisions out there, and you need to be able to have multiple guys that can carry that load for you offensively. So I think those elements, Cody, that's a big deal that you have to consider in your roster building, because you not only have to put together a squad that can win 10 plus games in the regular season when the weather is fine for the most part, but then once you get to the playoffs, now you're talking about, man, we have to completely shift the way that we play these games now.
Yeah, it's crucial. And every down and inclement weather matters. I mean, you had teams struggling to hold on to the football. Even Baltimore, like Baltimore's used to playing in some cold weather too. They had some problems securing the football, and it led to some missed opportunities for them against the Buffalo Bills. That's the offensive side in terms of what the Broncos, hopefully they were watching, they were learning. And even Sean Payton, hopefully he was watching, paying attention too, in terms of what they could do on the offensive side to compete and make that next step in 2025. But what about the defensive side of the ball? What did the games this weekend tell us about what the Broncos defense needs to be able to do when the postseason rolls around? You'll get that much more here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's Locked On Broncos podcast is brought to you by our friends over there at LinkedIn Jobs. And growing your small business in 2025 comes down to how well you can hire. And let's face it, better hires start with smarter insights. That's where LinkedIn comes in. With the strongest hiring data available, LinkedIn helps you identify the right candidates, giving you the confidence to make the best decisions for your business. I've used LinkedIn Jobs in the past before, and I can tell you it is a game changer when it comes to hiring the right fit. Small businesses, they're wearing a lot of hats, so every hire is crucial. LinkedIn gets that. That's why they connect you with the best candidates using data that you won't find anywhere else. From unique skills and interests to the connections that you share, LinkedIn helps you find the right person for the job. In fact, 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn has helped them find high-quality candidates. And you can hire smarter this year and find your next great hire on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Today's show is also brought to you by our friends over there at Prize Picks, and it's playoff time. And if you're like me, you want to make the most of these final weeks of football action. And that's where Prize Picks comes in handy, because if you love football and you want a chance to win real money while watching the games, Prize Picks is the place for you. It's the best way to turn your sports opinions into cash with daily fantasy player projections. With Prize Picks, you simply pick more or less on player stats like total passing yards or rushing touchdowns for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your money. And you can make your picks in less than 60 seconds, whether you're looking for a flex play to boost your payout or you want to cash out quickly. Prize Picks, they've got you covered. And with over 10 million members and billions in winnings, it's clear that people are loving Prize Picks. So here's a special offer for Locked On NFL listeners. Download the app today and use code Locked On NFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Once again, download the app today and use code Locked On NFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game.
The divisional round of the NFL playoffs defensively showed us that the Broncos could learn a thing or two from old friend Vic Fangio, as well as maybe Matt Milano there in Buffalo, kind of setting an example of what the Broncos might need this offseason. But what do they need in 2025 to kind of match what we've seen from some of these teams that are having success here in January? Well, Cody and I are going to talk about that on today's episode, Locked On Broncos and Broncos Country. Thanks so much for all you everyday listeners out there who make us your first listen of the day. We appreciate you so much and can't wait to bring you all of the offseason content and coverage for your favorite team. So if you haven't done so already, hit subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, as well as on YouTube. And Cody, let's discuss this, because when we watch these divisional round games, I mean, Vic Fangio, the Philadelphia Eagles, turned that defense around from, I think they were ranked 30th or worse in a lot of major categories last year. But also, you and I were kind of chatting before we started this show, like Matt Milano in Buffalo, he might be the place that we need to start talking, because that guy, he's coming off injury and still the range, sideline to sideline, like what a difference he made for that Buffalo defense against the potential MVP Lamar Jackson.
Yeah, look, I would say guys like Matt Milano, even Alex Anzalone of the Detroit Lions, like the way that those guys play, they have a specific trait. And not only are they very cerebrally sound football players at inside linebacker, but man, Sayre, they have the trait that the Broncos currently do not have right now at linebacker. And that is someone who can be sideline to sideline. Like Matt Milano, I mean, you go back and look at maybe how the Bills defense, they were playing Bo Nix in the Broncos offense. He was spying Bo Nix the whole game. And I was thinking to myself, like, okay, maybe he was just spying Bo Nix just because they're like, hey, the Broncos don't have a consistent threat of a run game except for Bo. Okay, we're going to spy him. But, I thought it was going to change a little bit when you're playing against Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry, and the Baltimore Ravens. No, he played spy to Lamar Jackson. And, man, he had a couple of plays where he's just reading Lamar. And then all of a sudden, Lamar's taking a step to get outside the pocket. He's tracking downhill at a 45-degree angle, and he's there. Like, he's not getting outran, but he's taking an angle where Lamar's got to make some tough choices. And I think defensively, you have a guy like that in the middle of the field, not your safeties, but in the middle at that second level, it changes, I think, what you can do from a philosophical standpoint, because Denver just had a lot of guys that would have to sit back in space and react to whatever was coming. And that's where defenses, they were just throwing crossers across the middle of the field, because the linebackers, they're getting their depth to their drop into wherever their zone is. But then it's, okay, pressure's not getting home. It's being able to stay active. It's being able to say, oh, no, this route, scramble drill, I'm going to be able to plant my foot and get to another area quickly. Or you have a linebacker that can chase a quarterback the way that the Matt Milanos of the world, or the Alex Anzalones, or the Fred Warners of the world can do that. Look, Fred Warner and the 49ers weren't in the playoffs. He's probably the pinnacle example, but Matt Milano is that guy. Zach Bond of the Philadelphia Eagles, who I think is, if I'm not mistaken, he's going to be a free agent this year. Maybe a Sean Payton wish list for that. Another example, like you need guys like that in order to take the next step, I think, defensively, especially in the postseason, because those guys can stop the run, but man, they can also chase, in today's NFL, the athletic and mobile quarterbacks that can get outside the pocket, because that's where this game has been heading for quite some time.
Yeah, if your linebackers aren't as athletic or more so than the tight ends they'll be covering and the quarterbacks that they'll be chasing, then you have got a problem, serious problem on that side of the ball. And I think for the Denver Broncos, this is the one area of the roster that they have truly had to punt the last 2 years. Like, if you really think about it, Cody, right? Because I mean, the starters going into this season were Alex Singleton and Cody Barton. When Cody Barton was signed, it was pitched as the guy upgrades our special teams, not necessarily that he's going to be a premier starter for this team or wear the green dot for this team. They had to switch the vision on Drew Sanders. He was initially an inside linebacker, then shifted to outside backer off the edge, and now we don't exactly know what he's going to be doing going forward, but based on the end of this past season, kind of seems like he's going to stick around off the edge. And so I think you have a situation here where over the last 2 seasons, who on your roster is a building block or somebody that you even would keep? Because I think that we could definitely see a complete overhaul. Like, did Justin Cernod play well this season when given the opportunity? Yeah, he played pretty well. Did Alex Singleton do well with his opportunity because he wasn't even supposed to be a starter? It was supposed to be Jonas Griffith with Josie Jewell, right? Alex Singleton did well, but is he going to be back at the age of 31 coming off an ACL injury? is Cody Barton, who is also a free agent. Is he going to be back? Because there was a lot of communication issues out there at that linebacker position that you and I talked about on this show. I could see that group being a completely overhauled group for the Denver Broncos this year because of what we've seen elsewhere in the league. I mean, which of the 4 teams remaining has weak linebackers? Like, I kind of thought it was funny that the Commanders went after like Bobby Wagner in free agency. Like, that guy's old, right? I mean, but how big of a difference has he made for the Commanders? And you talk about Milano for Buffalo, and Kansas City always has good linebackers. And then obviously
Bolton and those guys. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and Philadelphia, that was a big area of emphasis because remember, when they were in the Super Bowl 2 years ago, they had TJ Edwards and Kaiser White, who were both incredible for Jonathan Gannon. They lost those 2 guys the next year to free agency. The defense went to crap in Philadelphia. Then Vic Fangio comes in, where we know linebackers have to play at a high level and be instinctive, and tackling is non-negotiable. Remember? So you go out and you get Zach Bond, and Nakobe Dean has a healthy season, and you fortify the depth there. All of a sudden, they're back in one of the top 5 defenses in the NFL. So to me, Cody, the linebacker spot is probably the biggest area of emphasis for this defense going forward.
Yeah, I think it's going to have to be the biggest thing, too. And look, I would even say, too, even taking a note out of Philadelphia, I thought that their D-line, the trenches there, I thought they were strong at the point of attack. They made things really hard for Matthew Stafford and that offense to really get going. Of course, they got guys like Jalen Carter there. Denver, we know that their defensive line, that was the massive upgrade that they made this offseason. And certainly, DJ Jones is set to become a free agent. A majority of Broncos fans, we put the poll out on Locked On Broncos, said that they really want DJ Jones back. You've got Malcolm Roach behind him. So you got a good rotation with those 2 guys at your 2 deep. You've got Zach Allen. You've obviously got John Franklin Myers. You like those guys. But what is your 2 deep behind them? Jordan Jackson's a free agent. Inyoma Uwazurike, I don't know if he's going to be around on this team next year. I just don't think that his development is in a good enough spot. I just didn't see it this year when we saw him play. So we'll see where things are kind of at here. But I think that you have to continue to redefine that, hey, the trenches are the most important on offense and on defense. We've got to continue to strengthen that if that can be the case, and obviously upgrade inside linebacker. It's crazy when we think about it too. And we talked about the offense. We talked about the defense. The biggest need for them is upgrading the second level of the offense, which is the running back position, second level of the defense, which is linebacker. I think everything else will fall into place at that point. But I think those are probably going to be the 2 biggest needs. And then you add a wide receiver, like I said, a legit playmaker, and then you add a pass-catching tight end that can produce in the passing game for you as well. And then I think Denver's ready to take another step forward here. We'll see what kind of staff changes maybe kind of take place or happen throughout the offseason, which brings us to our next point here, Broncos Country. Obviously, late last week, Sean Payton made the decision to move on from Ben Kotwica, the team's special teams coordinator. What prompted this move, and what could be on the horizon? Are the Broncos looking to rizz up their special team side of the ball? We'll take a look at that much more here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's Locked On Broncos podcast is brought to you by our friends over there at FanDuel. And as you all know it, FanDuel, they are America's #1 sportsbook. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel, they make the NFL playoffs even more exciting. And right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going as conference championship weekend approaches. The big game's going to be approaching here in a couple of weeks. The FanDuel app is easy to navigate, and the variety of bets keeps every game exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around for your winnings. Whether you're betting on your favorite team or you're just looking to add some extra excitement to the playoffs, FanDuel has got you covered. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. The fourth quarter action of today's episode of the show is here, and Broncos Country just want to say thanks once again to all the everydayers, all the first listeners out there who make this show exactly what it is. Even though that the offseason is here, we're not on the offseason. It is still grind time for us here. And obviously, if you want to know what's going on with your favorite team, the Denver Broncos, every single day, all year long, throughout the entire offseason, become an everydayer. We got you covered Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Fresh, objective coverage of all things orange and blue. Plus, we got some really exciting things coming up. Position recaps of the year, grades, biggest needs, free agency wish list, everything that you could think of You get it here, Locked On Broncos. So with that said, Sayre, obviously there were some changes to the coaching staff after a successful season here for the Broncos, 10-7, the first playoff appearance since 2015. Denver made an interesting decision, one I honestly didn't see coming. They fired Sean Payton, fired special teams coordinator last week, really late Thursday, Friday. Ben Kotwica, he's now not the special teams coordinator here for Denver. The Broncos are in a market for a new coordinator in that position, which I found to be interesting. But I also think if you look at maybe the different things, the tea leaves, maybe it made sense a little bit, even though that Denver was drastically better. They were one of the best special teams units in all the NFL this year.
Yeah, the curve was changed with Tom McMahon's units in Denver, wasn't it? Because it was so bad special teams wise. I mean, they were just called the teams when Tom McMahon was there. There was nothing special about it whatsoever. So I get where Broncos country is coming from in this, Cody, the shock and surprise factor of it. But to me, we talked about this a number of times on the show. Like, you go back to the missed field goal against Buffalo, obviously, before half, and Sean Payton talked about how, like, they felt like they had the gap closed at that point, and you miss a field goal, and all of a sudden the complexion of the game completely changes. Like, making and missing a field goal at the end of a half, it sets off a butterfly effect that we just can't know how different that game would have been. Maybe would it have been 31-10 instead of 31-7? Maybe, but we don't know. We'll never know. And so you have that sort of situation. But you and I talked about like that Cincinnati game and the Los Angeles game before that. The two worst possible times for Riley Dixon to have the worst games of the season, maybe the Bengals game, maybe of his career, where setting up Joe Burrow and company for ideal field position consistently. You had the huge penalty on Tremont Smith on the punt return against the Los Angeles Chargers. And I know we can nitpick at times, and like there are certain things that's like, oh, well, those are just isolated incidents. But in reality, the special teams, as high as the floor was raised with, the Mike Westhoff and Ben Kotwica coming in, I don't know if the special teams nearly cost the Broncos a chance at the postseason in 2024.
I think it's fair to say that too. And I'll even throw in a couple of examples too. In some of those games that you mentioned, even Buffalo, the choice to even kick instead of kicking it out of bounds, not out of bounds, in the back of the end zone for a touchback, but forcing a return, and how many returns got past the 30-yard line, right? Worst case scenario, the opposing offense is going to start on the 30-yard line. But if you're going to kick it and you're going to force a return, you better make sure your coverage unit is going to tackle them at the 22, 23-yard line versus them getting like close to midfield. There were a couple of returns, I think once against Cincinnati, two against Cincinnati, one against the Chargers where that happened. I think one against Buffalo as well. And it's just like, you can't allow those things to happen because now you're giving the opposing offense better field position than if you would have just kicked it out of the back of the end zone and it was a touchback and they start on the 30-yard line. They got 70 yards to go. Instead, now you got 50. You got 45 yards to go on certain things, or you got 60 yards. When the field condenses, it makes your room for error a little bit thinner here at this point. And I think that was definitely part of it. And maybe too, like even going back to the blocked field goal against Kansas City, when you look at everything, that was something that Chiefs players said that was on film. And certainly when you go back and you watch the film and some of the games leading up to that game specifically, yeah, there was a little bit of a trend and they attacked and they exploited it. And that's on coaches to have to fix. I loved Ben Kotwica. I thought he's a fantastic coach, fantastic teacher. But it seems like at this point, and this was something also our good friend Mike Kliss put out there, really it kind of seemed like Westhoff and Kotwica were kind of a package deal. After that Kansas City thing, Westhoff started having some health issues. He stepped away. And Kliss had said something in his report along the lines that it made Kotwica a little bit more vulnerable in a sense. So now they make the change here. Chris Banjo, who's interviewed for the 49ers coordinator job in special teams, he's still an assistant now. He could be a guy who's getting interviewed in-house. But all eyes seem to point on New Orleans Saints, former special teams coordinator, more recently interim head coach Darren Rizzi, which I find interesting, right? Because now it's like the Saints to Broncos coaching pipeline continues, though I do find it interesting. Rizzi came over to New Orleans in 2019, spent 2019, 2020 with Sean Payton. Payton stepped away after that, after 2021, and then Rizzi kind of had a little bit more of a promotion. He got like associate head coach, special teams coordinator. So maybe he is one of those guys that Sean Payton is going to make an aggressive move for here.
Yeah, because when you fire somebody like Ben Kotwica, who did help raise the floor of the special teams, there's no
100%.
question
Players
about
loved
it.
him.
Players love him. Obviously, you had Pro Bowl return man Marvin Mims the last couple of seasons. Will Lutz won Special Teams Player of the Week a time or two, I believe, or maybe more.
Yeah.
So the floor was definitely raised. There's no question about it. I don't mean to just say, here's all the negatives. He deserved to be fired. I think you can justify it based on some things that happened, but I don't know that you have a justifiable case to fire a guy like this unless you have somebody in mind to replace him with. I think that's probably the biggest thing that you can take away from this. If you're a Broncos fan, it's like, wow, we fired a guy who, there was a lot of success at that unit. I think it's because you have somebody that can be even better, because Darren Rizzi's special teams units consistently in the top 5, top 10 of the NFL in pretty much every metric. And so I think it's a justifiable deal when you consider that you have a chance to upgrade. Look, that happens at every spot on the roster, every offseason, right? And so nothing is going to be exempt just for the sake of continuity. And especially if Westhoff and Kotwica were a package deal, I get it from the Broncos perspective. And look, Cody, you put stuff out there on tape. Dave Toub of the Kansas City Chiefs, he's going to take advantage of it. Look what happened against Houston this weekend. It wasn't a fluke. Like, Houston must have been putting the same thing on tape, because they blocked a 35-yard field goal or less against Houston in the postseason. And
They started the game with a big kick return too.
They did. Absolutely. And so it's those little things that's the difference for a team like Kansas City every year. It's like they do all the little things so maddeningly well that other teams just can't get out of their own way against teams like Kansas City. They can't help but make mistakes because these guys don't screw up. They don't really do things that, over the course of time, it compounds, and other teams do. So that's where the Broncos need those little edges. And over the course of a year, Sean Payton says 100 yards, 7 points. How many of those hidden yards on special teams factored into over time in those one-score games that the Broncos lost in 2024?
So many of them too. And to that point as well, you and I talk about it as well. Like, when you look at some of these teams that are in the Final Four here at this point of the AFC, NFC playoffs, the margin for error that you and I talk about with some of these teams like Kansas City and Buffalo, Baltimore even, these teams have Baltimore had as many turnovers as they did and still had a chance to win that game, or at least tie it, send it in an overtime. So those teams have built-in margins for error where they can make one or two mistakes and still have a chance and be in it. Whereas I think Denver, they're not at that point just yet, because some of those mistakes really seem to snowball and become bigger. And that's what you cannot have. And I would say that is where you have to figure out, like, how do you put stuff? And I think that's where Sean Payton, as being around Sean and seeing how Sean coaches, and look, Sean's got his own flaws as a coach, and I think he'll even admit that. But I think that the emphasis and the goal here is to practice every situation, be as knowledgeable about any situation possible that could come up in the course of the game. It could come up maybe once every 6 years, but you need to know about it. That's where Sean is at, because he believes in those things that you attribute to hidden yards or yards lost, opportunities lost out on, and things that can, maybe be an inch from maybe missing a field goal right before halftime that could have tied the game up against Buffalo to, hey, now all of a sudden you miss it, you lose momentum, and now it spirals out. Denver doesn't have that built-in margin for error yet, because teams like Buffalo and Kansas City, they don't make those mistakes. And if they make a mistake once, they don't usually make it twice. And so that's where Denver has to be. And I think we've learned a lot about maybe where this Broncos team can grow and obviously can become here in the postseason by looking at these teams as an example. And it should be fuel, because I know the players are sitting there watching. And I think that's also, it's the bittersweet part, right? You wish the team that you're covering is playing in the postseason. The players obviously in Denver wish there were. But to see their thoughts live as the game's going on, it also shows you a perspective you don't get to see in the regular season as well. So that was kind of a cool insight here. But Darren Rizzi may be expected to be the top target here for Sean Payton to replace Ben Kotwica as the team's special teams coordinator. Will that happen? Well, if it does, you're going to have an episode of Locked On Broncos to guide you there. But we're really going to begin a really fun preview series here where we take a look at every position on offense, every position on defense for the next 2.5 weeks here. That's going to be fresh content for you, the listeners. We're going to kick things off on tomorrow's episode for all you everydayers with the Broncos quarterback position. What do we learn about it in 2024? What does it look like? What's the biggest question for it in 2025? And how can they address those questions? That'll be tomorrow's episode of Locked On Broncos, barring anything that's breaking news. We got you covered here every single day all year long. To all the everydayers, first listeners, thank you so much for making the show exactly what it is. Sayre Bedinger, myself, we'll see you tomorrow.